Well, good morning. I am really excited to be here today with Eric Skorsinski, who's the host, as most of you guys know, of the highly rated Preacher Boys podcast. And what we want to talk about today has to do with the recent sexual abuse allegations made against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. What Eric has realized is many people are enraged that the same Democrats who were vocal against other political candidates involved in similar scandals are remaining silent on social media. And we know that the hashtag #MeToo was trending on Twitter on February 24th, with many of the tweets urging others to speak up. So, Eric, I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about why this is so passionate? You're so passionate about this.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, and I'm glad to be kind of flipping the script a little bit. I know I just had you on just a few minutes ago talking about a separate but equally important subject, and yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. My background and most of my audience knows, but for anybody that doesn't, my background is a religious one, and I saw a lot of religious abuse covered up in the 18 or 19 years that I was within the independent fundamental Baptist movement. And I felt really silenced. I felt like, when I would try to talk about the subject, when I would try to share it with people that I trusted really my entire life and get them to take this issue seriously, it was very difficult to do so. When I would talk about an abusive pastor or someone who was abusing a ministry position, I would be shut down or silenced and told, you're bitter, you're just trying to attack somebody, you're attacking the quote unquote man of God. And so I'm no stranger to seeing people in power, their wrongdoings or their abusive tendencies get ignored. And so when I saw what happened with Andrew Cuomo and the way that there were many on the left who were completely silent when allegations of sexual abuse came out, to me, it just reeked of that same kind of partisan attitude where if he's one of us, we're going to be quiet and we're not going to respond to it the way that we normally would.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, why don't you tell us, what do you feel like are the biggest dangers of partisanship when we're dealing with these abuse and abuse allegations?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of alluded to, I mean, it's not a partisan issue. Like abuse affects people who are poor, who are wealthy. I mean, this, working with domestic violence and sexual assault victims, like, you know that there is no real category that's specifically affected. I'm reading a book right now called Why Women Are Blamed for Everything by Dr. Jessica Taylor. And that's one specific thing is that abuse seems to happen, to every class, to every race, some disproportionately. It's the way that's handled is very different, but across every class, like some experience of abuse is very common. And I believe it's 1 in 3 women are abused. So it is extremely affecting everybody across different denominations and barriers and political parties. It happens. And so I think when we respond to it and we pick and choose which ones to be outraged about, we leave a lot of victims out in the cold, and we see this happen a lot politically. I mean, you look at the Brett Kavanaugh situation and the vitriol and the just attacks on her from one political party and overwhelming support from another. And then you look at an Andrew Cuomo situation, and it's a reverse of those stories in a lot of ways. Sure, you have people speak out like Sean King or Rose McGowan, and there's some that have been consistent in some of this stuff, but it's extremely dangerous when we let our political or religious views make us, pick and choose which abusers we want to stand with or which victims we want to believe or not believe.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And, we really need to really look inside and make sure that we're treating everybody the same. Now, you mentioned, that this abuse happens to everybody, all walks of life, all classes. So, what do you think makes it so difficult to spot red flags, particularly when we're dealing with high profile leaders?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I'm reading another book, and I've been reading a ton of books, so I'm gonna rely on some quotes that say it better than I could. But I'm reading right now a book called "Pray Tell" by Tiffany Bloom, and one statement that just stuck with me. It's one of the best quotes I've heard in a long time. Is that it's very hard to see red flags when we're wearing rose-colored glasses. And I think a lot of times it is difficult to see red flags, especially when it's somebody who's high profile within an organization that we're very committed to. It's when we have this affinity for fellow Democrats or fellow Republicans or fellow Baptist, fellow Catholics, and we've got our life wrapped up in a way where we see a lot of positive benefits. It can be extremely hard for us to see any potential threat. You're just not looking for it. It's the same as when you go outside, you're a little bit on guard. If you go for a walk around your neighborhood, you're looking for dogs, you're looking for people you don't know, you're looking for cars coming. You don't expect that when you're sitting on your couch in your living room. So your radar is kind of down and out of commission sometimes in these situations. And unfortunately, a lot of abusers take advantage of that and use that to prey on their victims with much more ease.
I love that quote that you gave. I'm definitely going to hang on to that one. So, speaking of what you just said about leaders taking advantage of it, why don't you talk a little bit about the grooming process for people that don't really understand that, and how leaders use that to lead to a path of potential abuse?
Right. Well, I mean, the grooming process, a lot of people are becoming familiar with through the Me Too movement. I think even the conversation of how that works, wasn't really public knowledge or even in the radar or the kind of terminology that people use. But now people are getting familiar with it. It's the idea of somebody preparing someone for abuse. And we usually think of grooming as being, predator to prey. Like I'm going to make someone feel increasingly comfortable with this kind of touch or this kind of conversation or this type of situation. And that's definitely one element, but grooming is multifaceted. When someone is grooming, I deal with a lot of victims who were underage, and so the grooming is happening with the victim, but they're also normalizing the relationship with the child with the parents under the guise of a coach and student relationship or a teacher relationship or a youth pastor relationship. And so they're grooming not only their victim, but they're grooming other people around the situation to become comfortable with them being away with that person for a good length of time, or having private cell phone communication. Grooming happens all over the place, and especially with again with high profile leaders, these people have to groom the fellow coworkers. They have to normalize it with their staff. They have to normalize why someone's in their office when they shouldn't be, or having a private phone line, like I mentioned earlier. There is a lot of grooming that's happening, and it's happening even publicly. The public persona of these leaders tells one story, while what's happening in reality is farther from couldn't be farther from the what the reality that they're presenting. You look at this with the Catholic Church, or or you look at it with even a Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was producing films with women in these powerful leading roles. Who would expect him to be involved in the type of scandal that he was involved with? But again, it's because they're constantly working on grooming as many people as possible in their surroundings. And so again, while we look at this story and we see, yes, an allegation of abuse and it should be taken seriously, we also have to look at the kind of structures that make this kind of abuse possible. And I hope that people across party lines are able to work together and identify some of those red flags a little bit more clearly.
I hope so too. I hope they all watch this and hear what you had to say about it. The things you mentioned about grooming, I think are things a lot of people don't think about, especially when it comes to grooming the other people involved and the public. So that's amazing information. Why don't you tell us? I know most of the people on your page know where to find your podcast, but for those who don't, why don't you tell everybody where they can hear you?
Yeah, I mean, the best place is right here on the Preacher Boys Facebook page, or you can catch me on the Preacher Boys podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your shows. And the other place would just be Preacher Boys Doc, so preacherboysdoc.com. That's where I post all the updates and everything that's happening with the show. So anywhere that you want to connect, I'm definitely willing to, and would love to chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time this morning, Eric. I really appreciate it. I'm sure all the viewers do as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claudia. Cool. Just stopped that. Awesome.